always knew life was a fight, not because I wanted it to be, but because I had no other choice. My first home, it was a tiny apartment in Milwaukee. Old walls, peeling paint, creaky floors. I don't remember the smells or colors, but I remember the fear. It was everywhere like a shadow you couldn't outrun. My stepfather was a cruel man. His anger was random, uncontrollable. I learned to read his mood by the sound of his footsteps. Fast and heavy, he was drunk and mad. Slow, brace yourself, it's gonna be worse. Every day felt like survival. One night, he stormed into my room. His breath reeked of alcohol, and his eyes were burning with hate. He screamed at me. I didn't cry. I just stared at him, thinking, I will never be like you. In all that chaos, there was my mother. She was my safe place. I saw her pain, but she never let me see her break. Her smile was rare, and I held onto it like a lifeline. One day, she sat me down and said,
"You can only depend on yourself. The cavalry ain't coming."
I believed her. Some nights, when my stepfather was out, she'd sit with me and read aloud. I remember one time she read The Great Gatsby. I didn't fully understand the story back then, but I listened to her voice, caught the way it changed with each word. She explained what it meant to chase a dream, to never give up. In those moments, I forgot everything else. I saw hope in her, strength, and that gave me belief in myself. School was my escape. There, I could just be a kid who asked too many questions and read too many books. I found comfort in the pages. Every book was a window to a world where fear didn't exist. I read about people who overcame impossible struggles and changed their lives, and I kept asking myself, why can't I? But reality always pulled me back. We moved a lot, sometimes to another part of Milwaukee, sometimes to a whole new city. I felt lost. I had no friends, but I had a dream. I didn't know what I wanted to be, but I knew exactly who I didn't want to become. When I was 14, my stepfather snapped again. That day, I made myself a promise. One day, I'll be free. I'll do whatever it takes to never come back to this hell. That promise became my engine. Every single day, I repeated it to myself like a mantra. My childhood wasn't about happy moments. It was about survival, but looking back now, I realize that's what made me who I am. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. I wouldn't let that house, those walls, that fear define my life. I would break free. I would become who I wanted to be, and no one, not my stepfather, not fear, not poverty, was going to stop me. Youth is a strange time. You don't know what's ahead, but you already feel the weight of your choices. After high school, I knew one thing: I couldn't stay where I was. I had to move forward. Inspired by my uncle's stories about his time in the Navy, traveling the world, I decided to enlist in the US Navy. It wasn't just a whim, it was my chance to break free from the cycle of poverty and violence. At 18, I signed the contract and joined the medical corps. There, through strict discipline and endless training, I learned one more crucial lesson: patience, patience, and resilience. I served for 2 years studying cardiothoracic surgery under an experienced doctor, Dr. Edward Hanks. The first months were brutal: early mornings, rigid schedules, piles of medical books. But over time, I started to see the purpose behind the routine. I saw pain, fear, but I also saw how much a helping hand could change someone's life. One moment stuck with me. During a training exercise, I assisted in treating an injured sailor. His face was twisted in pain, but he looked at me with hope. And right then, I understood. No matter how bad things get, you can still make a difference. That feeling that you can change someone's life, that became my fuel. But as I looked at the doctors who had spent decades training, I realized that by the time I could fully practice medicine, the field would have changed completely. I wasn't ready to wait. I needed to act now. In 1976, after leaving the Navy, I returned to civilian life with one suitcase and a head full of dreams. Dr. Hanks invited me to join his team, and soon I was running the research lab. Over the next 2 years, I ran dozens of experiments, published 3 papers, and got so good at my work that I could predict results with my eyes closed. But then, one night, I saw Doctor, my 55-year-old colleague, sitting at his desk past midnight, struggling to finish a grant application. His hands were shaking from exhaustion, and on his desk was a picture of his kids he barely saw. By 1978, it hit me. 30 years from now, I'd be him, smart, tired, trapped. So I walked away. Science needed fanatics. I wanted to live now. I found a new job, selling medical equipment. The pay was better, but stability was an illusion. Now my survival depended on sales, on how well I could convince people to buy. It was a world of brutal competition, where every day was a fight, but I liked it. I felt like I was moving forward. That's when Linda came into my life. We met at a friend's party. She was smart, confident, and knew exactly what she wanted. We got close fast, and before long, we were a family. But over time, it became clear we saw the future differently. Linda believed in the traditional path: education, career, stability. I knew I couldn't take the predictable route. I needed more, even if I didn't yet know what that more was. The gap between us grew. We spoke the same language, but we didn't understand each other. And then I met Maria. She was different. She got me in a way no one else did. Before long, she told me she was pregnant. In 1981, our son Alex was born. I remember the day I first held him. The world stopped. I looked at his tiny face, felt his little fingers wrap around mine, and I knew this was it. This was the meaning of my life. I made a promise: he will never know hunger or fear. I will be the father I never had. But reality hit hard. Money was tight. I worked day and night trying to sell equipment that no one wanted to buy. I didn't know then that soon we'd be sleeping in shelters and train station bathrooms. I didn't know how many tears I'd have to hide from my son. But I knew one thing: I wouldn't let this world break us. I would do whatever it took for Alex to be proud of me. And if I had to walk through hell to make it happen, I would. Because happiness isn't something you're given. It's something you fight for. Sometimes life gives you a hint, a small, fleeting one. The key is to notice it. I was walking through San Francisco, gripping this bulky medical imaging device that no one wanted to buy. My head was spinning with thoughts. How do I feed my son? Where are we going to sleep tonight? And then I saw it. A shiny, expensive, completely out-of-reach red car. Behind the wheel sat a man in a suit that probably cost more than I made in a year. His confidence was overwhelming. I couldn't help myself and asked, "Excuse me, what do you do?" He turned, looked me over, my worn-out jacket, the medical device in my hands, but instead of laughing, there was something like curiosity in his eyes.
"Stockbroker."
"Oh, how do you become one?" I blurted out without thinking. He smirked, pulled out a business card and handed it to me.
"You learn, you take risks, and you never stop asking questions. You know, I always bet on people who aren't afraid to ask."
Then he drove off, leaving me with his card and a strange feeling, like someone had just lit a match inside me. A broker. I didn't know a thing about stocks, finance, or Wall Street. But I knew one thing. I wanted to try. That guy helped me get in touch with managers at top investment firms. Over the next 2 months, I kept cancelling or rescheduling my sales meetings so I could go to interviews for training programs. I landed an internship at one of the firms, and thinking this was my big break, I quit my main job in sales. But I kept selling medical equipment in the evenings. Those $300 to $400 a month were the only safety net we had. But when I showed up at the office to start training, I found out the manager who hired me had been fired the week before. My spot was gone. Things with my son's mother were getting worse and worse. One day, we had a huge fight, and the police, who happened to be nearby, stepped in. When they ran my car's plates, they found out I had $1,200 in unpaid parking tickets. They arrested me. I spent 10 days in jail. 10 days that felt like forever. When I got out, I had no job, no money, not even a place to stay. While I was gone, my apartment had been emptied out. I was on the street, but I couldn't give up. In the same clothes I had on when I left jail, I found another internship at a different investment firm. It was an opportunity, but with no guarantees and no paycheck. The internship only took up my mornings. In the afternoons, I ran from clinic to clinic, trying to sell the equipment, and at night, I pored over textbooks. My voice was hoarse, my fingers trembled from exhaustion. A month later, my son's mother, Jackie, called me to meet in the park. She was holding Alex's hand, and there was this tired indifference in her eyes.
Take him. For a week. If you don't take him to the hospital or the police, you can keep him.
I can handle it, I said, but her car was already disappearing around the corner. Taking my son in changed everything. The shelter I stayed in didn't allow kids, so we hid. We slept in subway stations, shelters, sometimes even in a train station bathroom. For almost a year, no one at work knew we were homeless. I smiled, joked, pretended everything was fine. But every night, as I laid my son down on a piece of cardboard, I told myself, I won't give up. After a year of drifting between shelters and train stations, I got a letter stamped with the logo of a major investment firm. Your persistence has impressed the committee. Come in for an interview. At the meeting, I placed a list of 50 clients on the table, people I had found in just 1 month. They're ready to invest $10,000. Give me a chance and I'll bring in 10 times more. The manager flipped through the pages in silence. Then he looked up.
You do know we don't have programs for people without an address, right?
But I have this. I pulled out the crumpled business card of that broker. He believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself. His eyes lingered on the familiar logo.
Come in tomorrow, no guarantees.
That's how my internship started. No salary, but access to a phone and client lists. Every evening as I dropped my son off at the shelter, I told myself, one more day, one more step. 5 years later, I started my own firm and rented a garage on the outskirts of San Francisco. My office, a desk made from wooden pallets, a computer with a cracked screen, and Alex doing his homework on a crate that once held medical equipment. My first client was Jerry, the bus driver from Route 27, the same one who used to drive me to interviews.
I saw you sleeping at the train station,
he said, handing me an envelope.
If you made it out of that, my money's safe with you.
His $500 turned into $700 in a month. A year later, I was managing accounts for dozens of people like him, teachers, plumbers, single mothers. They weren't chasing millions, they just wanted a life without fear. While opening a shelter for homeless families, I noticed a man with a child. His fingers clutched a worn-out suitcase, just like the one I used to have.
Can we stay here for the night?
He asked. Not just that. I pointed to a sign, free courses for fathers. Tomorrow I'll show you how to turn that suitcase into startup capital. I described that moment in the final chapter of my book. When an intern asked me why I did all this, I opened a page with a photo, me and Alex, sleeping on a train station floor covered with a newspaper, so they know rock bottom is a trampoline, not a grave. Sometimes happiness isn't the destination, it's the path you choose, no matter what.